Hello, my gorgeous makeup loving friends. Yes, I have a full face of makeup, so you know that this is what it's going to look like at the end of the day. Well, not the end of this day, but you know what I mean. You know what it's going to look like at the end of the video, is what I'm trying to say. Today's video is a makeup and murder, if you can tell by the title. I know, fantastic. So I'm talking about Aileen Wuornos because two of my friends and subscribers, Thea and Rebecca, actually requested that I talk about her. So I'm talking about her from like a psychology point of view, etc., and just talking about the general case. It does take me a while to put these videos together, so that's why there's such a gap between them. I used apparently a lot of makeup because it's all over the place. I used the Elf J Kissa Palette, which was gifted to me by the beautiful Elena. I also used the Profusion palette, which was gifted to me by Elena as well. I'm just mentioning the stuff that was gifted to me because I wanted to like thank people. Missa gave me the Diamond Dasher, so I use that again. And Cheryl, you fabulous creature, she got me this lipstick, which is Raspberry Ripple by Artittude Cosmetics. So that is what is on my lips now. It's actually very comfortable formula. So if you want to hear me talk about Aileen Wuornos, this is the video for you. I do have to give a cautionary note here right now. I don't think this is a video that is appropriate for kids. So anyone under the age of 18, maybe X out of this. This is not for you, because I do talk not in great depth or detail about murder and rape and sexual assault, etc. So if those topics are potentially triggering for you, do not watch this. I don't want to put anyone in any sort of a position where they would feel vulnerable or potentially upset. That is not what this video is meant for. So, you know, proceed with caution. If, however, you are okay with this particular topic and you are over the age of 18, then do please keep on watching. You will see how I did this amazing, complicated makeup look. I know. One day you'll be as talented as me. You probably already are much more talented than me. Oh well, do please keep on watching. So, Aileen Wuornos. I mean, that's one way to start a conversation, completely different sort of conversation, but there you go. I love how you've come from like the intro where I'm like all presumably at least semi-presentable, and now I look like a thumb in an oversized jumper from when I was much bigger. Don't mind the sports bra. I was doing yoga, I was trying to do things. But let's just start off with me priming my eyelids, and we're gonna get straight into it. So, Aileen Wuornos, she is of Finnish descent, I believe on her mother's side. But let's consider, I suppose, the question of like, are you born a killer or are you made a killer? And Aileen Wuornos is a very, very interesting story that looks at that particular question. So we have to kind of go back a little bit. So Aileen's mother, Diane, fell in love with a young criminal called, I believe, Leo Pittman. And she was 14 at the time. Yeah, you heard me, 14. And she went against everyone's wishes and went off and married him. And shortly after, she fell pregnant. Now, she fell pregnant with her first child, Keith, who was to be Aileen's brother, obviously. And then she obviously raised him for a little bit. And then she got pregnant again with Aileen. But about 2 months into her pregnancy, Leo, her father, got into trouble with the law. So he figured the way to get out of trouble, because it was the 1970s, was, of course, to enlist. So when he went off and enlisted, Diane, her mum, basically took that as the opportunity to be like, and now I go. So it does make you kind of wonder what exactly was going on there. Like, was it a very, very bad situation, or like, wow, what's the story? I have the Elf J Kissa Palette. Thank you, Elena, you're a doll. And I'm just going to go into Thatcher. So yeah, it does kind of make you wonder what exactly was going on, that was her initial thing. So she went back to her parents with Keith and with Aileen, and basically abandoned them there. Aileen and Keith grew up thinking that their mum was actually their sister. So it's quite similar to the Ted Bundy situation. Now, sometimes these things work out, you know, being raised by your grandparents. Like, there's plenty of people for whom that happens. Now, Aileen would never actually meet her biological father. Why? Because when she was about 6 or 7, he was actually, I believe he was jailed for sexual assault of, I believe, a 6 or 7-year-old, and there was also like a question of murder around that as well. So it does make you wonder, you know, were there genetics involved in this particular case? So he actually ended up killing himself in prison, so she never got to meet her biological father. I'm now going into the shade Pretty Girl. Who's a pretty girl? I mean, me, obviously. So, I mean, that in itself is interesting. So she was raised then with her grandparents. And like I said, I mean, that works out for a lot of people. However, in this case, it wasn't fantastic. Both of her grandparents were alcoholics. Her grandmother, I believe her name was Britta, she tried her best, but she was very alcohol dependent. And her grandfather was an alcoholic, but he was also incredibly abusive. There were allegations that Aileen made towards him that he sexually assaulted her repeatedly, and that some of the punishments included, because they were very harsh on her, and some of the punishments included like her having to strip and take off her clothes, etc. And there was also a question of him having his friends over to essentially rape her. Like, I will never get monetized when I say these things, but it is what it is. Like, it was a kid. It was rape. Utterly disgusting. So obviously, this is the environment that she was growing up in. She was experiencing this essentially from day one. And she was very close with her brother Keith. And to her own admission, far too close. Because when she was really young, they actually started to engage in a sexual relationship with each other. So yeah, I mean, what makeup story time that doesn't involve incest could you possibly want? I mean, good Lord, it is a very interesting case though. But like, she adored Keith. So she was also, it was remarked by her, I can't really say school friends, but people who went to school with her, that she was quite awkward and that she didn't have the necessary social skills to kind of interact with other people. No major surprise. I mean, she was brought up in that sort of a situation. I'm going into the shade Canon. So yeah, of course she wasn't going to have the skills necessary to like form attachments, etc. So she found it very difficult to make friends, and she figured out, unfortunately, early on that because she was so used to all of this sexual behavior, that she could have these boys that she went to school with pay her for sex with money or cigarettes or whatever. And that was how she would kind of try and get herself in with people, you know, to make friends. It was the only way she knew how to get attention, which in itself is incredibly telling of the sort of home life that she had. I just think it's so atrociously sad. But like, there was even a story that one of her close friends actually said that she had saved loads and loads of money, and she tried to have a party, and she'd bought like lots of bits and pieces, and she was super excited because people actually turned up, but they kicked her out of her own party. That's, I mean, it's just so sad to hear. Like, I just think it's so incredibly tragic. So it became like really well known that she was doing this, that she was essentially selling herself for these things and essentially for validation as well. But at the same time, her grandfather was also having his friends come over and just be utterly disgusting. What else can I say? And she actually fell pregnant then when she was, well, she gave birth at 14, so I think she fell pregnant at 13. She gave birth to a baby boy, and she alleges that it was a child of rape from one of these particular men. Now, we don't know who it is or the names, etc. involved, but it's just so tragic. But what I find interesting is, like, the social services, etc. at the time didn't really think, oh, well, this is a bit odd that there's a 14-year-old here who's having a baby. Now, she ended up giving the child up for adoption, and she actually wasn't allowed to like even hold him. Like, I just find that so sad. She herself admits that it was like right that she gave him up for adoption, because like what sort of a life would he have had? But she would have at least liked to have had more kind of ownership in that decision. I'm just going to pick up more of that deep purple. So to me, I just find it incredibly sad. So she had all of this going on, and granted, her grandmother wasn't wildly present in her life, but she did actually care. She just didn't have the skills necessary to be a really positive figure in her life, I guess is what we're going to say on that. I also have this Profusion palette. Are you happy, Elena? I'm trying. I'm doing an Elena and I'm using the palettes. Look, I don't know what it is that I'm talking about. It's best to... well, I do on the Aileen Wuornos, but not on the whole makeup thing. You know, that thing. Ugh. I finally opened it. There we go. And I'm just going into the pale blue shade. So at this point, she had had the baby. She was back at home. I want to say it was Michigan that she lived in, so very cold. And she obviously didn't adjust well to everything that was going on, and just going back to living her life and pretending like this big thing hadn't actually just happened to her. Like, I mean, that's incredibly traumatic. Like, childbirth is a big deal, as anyone who's gone through it will tell you. Like, it is difficult. Never mind, you know, when you are young and this has happened to you out of your control or desire, and you are a sexual assault victim. Like, utterly disgusting. So obviously she was never given any counselling. She was put back to that home where she was essentially abused, and then eventually her grandmother succumbed to, I believe it was liver failure, because she was exceptionally alcohol dependent, like very, very bad. And shortly after she died, her grandfather basically kicked her and her brother Keith out of the house. So here she was, a 15, 16-year-old, all by herself, nobody to, you know, support her, take care of her. What did she do? She ended up living in the woods. In the woods. In Michigan. Like, it's so cold there. So she did the only thing she knew how to do, which was to essentially turn tricks. You know, she had to. There was like no other option given to her, and everyone was being incredibly cruel and alienating, etc. So eventually then she decided, well, I'm gonna leave Michigan. I'm going into the Me, Myself and Mitchell palette, and I'm going into this shade here, I believe. Yeah, it's called Miles High. And anyways, she wanted to go out to LA because she was like, it's warmer there, which, fair. If you've been living in a wood for several months, I would kind of assume you'd want to live somewhere warm. Like, just, oh, it's so tragic. Like, I find her story just incredibly sad, like incredibly sad. So she made her way to LA, and she obviously did what the only thing she knew how to do, which was selling herself for money. She followed the pattern of her family in terms of alcohol and drugs, and went down that particular line. She stopped even like staying in hostels or like renting rooms, because she decided to just save her money for alcohol and drugs, and that she would just sleep on the beach. So that's what she ended up doing with herself. Just, in my opinion, it's an incredibly sad story. So she engaged in a lot of like petty theft, etc. And at one point, she actually went to like a convenience store, I guess is what they call them in the States. And she decided, hey, I'm going to rob this convenience store, which is like, oh, okay. I mean, not the best decision, but okay, I see where you're going with this. But she decided she would, I mean, even just the thought of it, she decided that she would rob this place while wearing a bikini, which I think is like the first thing that should show you that she was mentally very unwell, like she was not stable. I think the case of Aileen Wuornos really shows you how lacking services can be. That's not like a slight on the people who work in these particular situations. They're under-resourced and understaffed and overworked. But I think just so much went wrong. So anyways, obviously, she got caught and she got put into jail. And actually, like at one point, she actually even ended up marrying like this old man, like, which is like hilarious. He was in his like, I think 70s or something. And it's part of how we know that she had like a very, very volatile personality, because they did not stay married for very long. I believe it was like 2 months or something like that. Because he filed for like an annulment because she took his walking stick from him and beat him with it, which is insane. But it just shows she had a real issue around like emotional regulation, which kind of, in my opinion, it seemed to be like a manifestation of borderline personality disorder, in particular when you're seeing that she didn't have any like strong and firm attachments from early on. That could be what was manifesting. And if that's what somebody has and they're receiving no help for it, it's utterly horrific. I think it's completely cruel to do that to somebody. So this all happened, and she, during this period of time, obviously she ended up going to jail, and you know, she would have learned more about, you know, the prison system and crime, etc. Which, you know, fair enough. But in the interim, then her brother, the absolute love of her life, like she adored him. Yes, I know they had a totally inappropriate relationship, but that was probably, oddly and sadly, one of the strangely healthiest family relationships that she had, which, can we just say for a moment how bananas that is to actually say. But he ended up passing away. He had throat cancer. He actually hid it from her. He didn't tell her how bad it was. So it kind of came as a big shock to her. And he led a similarly vagabond life, but he actually left her a lot of money. Well, not a lot of money. He left her, I think it was $10,000, which she promptly spent on, I believe it was a car and she ended up crashing it and like totally writing it off, which just shows you the sort of like very wild personality that you're dealing with in this particular scenario. I'm doing well cutting a crease in and talking about this at the same time. Now, it may have been when she was in prison, because, you know, she was in a female prison, and we've all seen Orange is the New Black, that she started to see that she could get some sort of solace in female companionship. So maybe that was the start of that particular thing. I personally think she was probably always bisexual or pansexual or whatever you want to call it, and that time just kind of made her more aware of it. And she had so many issues around sex, obviously, what with the continuous sexual assault in her early life, just utterly horrific. So she was still going around selling herself for money, for drugs, for alcohol, for whatever. She'd go to like biker bars because they would kind of turn a blind eye over, you know, that sort of thing, because they were like, meh, you do what you want to do, we're not gonna judge, which, you know, fair. I think they kind of recognized in her that she'd had like a really traumatic upbringing. I'm gonna take, I just got this the other day, it's the Urban Decay Heavy Metal Liner in Stage Dive, and it is green. Let me do the things that I want to my face. So she was still just kind of going around. She was finding it, however, harder and harder to get clients. Why was she finding it harder and harder to get clients? Well, from those years of abuse, living rough, doing drugs, drinking, it had obviously physically affected her. So, you know, if you do these things for long enough, it does unfortunately affect your physical appearance. So she wasn't as essentially attractive as she once was, because she was a very beautiful like woman. Like, she was tall, she was blonde, she was slim, but she was finding it harder and harder to get Johns. So she was taking more and more risks in terms of how she would find a client, which, you know, there's still a lot of debate as to, you know, the veracity of her claims around the first victim. So this is part of why I'm mentioning this. But she then happened to meet Tyra Moore, who was to be, in Aileen's eyes at least, the love of her life. So they met, and it was an intense connection. So when they met, they spent an entire weekend together where they barely left the bedroom except to get food, which honestly, like, that sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Like, you know, we all want somebody that we have that sort of a relationship with. Tyra was, I believe, 24 at the time, and she was working as like a hotel maid. And I just think that Aileen had been looking for somebody to love her and care for her and give her, you know, this unconditional positive regard. And she felt that she had that in Tyra. Now I'm just taking some cotton buds to clean off the concealer, because it'll just make a cleaner base, and I'm not going to have as much faffing around. That's why I'm doing that, because somebody asked me that a while ago, and they were like, why have you done this? And I'm like, yeah, I'm probably not the person to ask makeup questions to, because I'm not very good at this, but you know, whatevs. Sorry, it's a very disjointed talk. Welcome to my really, really bad TED Talk. It's fine though, because it's free, so you can't actually whinge too much about the quality of it. Oh my lord, I really did just like let the blue go everywhere, didn't I? Oh well, first world problems. It could be so much worse. So, yes, Aileen had met Tyra at this point, and she just thought the sun, the moon, the stars flowed out of Tyra. And she went back to almost being a teenager and thinking, how can I get somebody's approval? I will give them things. So she went back to like, you know, that thing of like, I will host parties and I will do this and I will do that and they will like me. Which, oh my God, like teenage me just totally 100% gets that, you know. I'm gonna take more of that glitter because I think I need a smidgen more of it. So she decided to don the role of like being her, I don't want to say carer, but like her provider, that she would buy things for Tyra, like alcohol and drugs, etc. And, you know, she wanted to show her love and affection in that way. And Tyra was totally fine with doing that, obviously. And of course, like I said, she was finding it harder and harder to get clients because, well, they were being a bit more discerning about who they wanted. And now she had traditionally always been I'll wear a shirt and some shorts and I'll find a client, no problem. But she was starting to have trouble with that. That just wasn't quite working out the way that it once did for her. So she still wanted to provide for Tyra. Tyra knew, by the way, that she was a prostitute and she was fine with it, you know. I mean, to each their own, like, no judgment here. So Tyra would put a lot of pressure on her to have money and, you know, to take care of her, etc. So there was a lot of additional pressure on Aileen to go and essentially provide for the two of them. And I mean, you have to remember at this point, her grandfather, who had been a huge figure in her life, obviously a very negative one, he had actually died, that he'd been found dead in his garage. I believe it was suspected suicide at the time. So even though she obviously had this very fraught relationship with him and he was horrifically abusive, he was still her grandfather. Well, actually, in reality, she believed for a long time that he was her father because of everything that, you know, went down. So I would imagine that upon hearing about his death, Keith was dead, her grandmother was dead, she had no ties to her original home from Michigan except for like her one friend Dawn, who still remained actually very friendly with her, and her friend Dawn actually helped to take care of Keith when he was dying, which is just, it's nice at least that she had one good true friend. She's just had like a horrible life. You can just see she was manipulated by people, and it was just this perfect storm of her having a psychological disorder, in my opinion, that meant that she was just so open and vulnerable to looking for the love and approval of other people. Like, I just think it's so sad. Like, I genuinely, I find it to be such a sad story. But anyways, I will get to the point eventually. So she was obviously trying to get money in. You can see I'm really bad at putting on glitter and doing straight lines. Like, that was horrific. Like, that has gone absolutely everywhere. So she was still trying to turn tricks, but she was finding it more and more difficult. So she was actually having to take really risky jobs, essentially. So she was going along like the highway, the motorway, to try and find people. And it was then that she came across her first victim. Now there are 7 in total, and I can't remember all of their names. So forgive me for that. So she came across Richard Mallory, I believe was his name, and he was meant to be coming into LA for like the weekend to hang out with some friends, and he picked her up because that was kind of the way that she would turn her tricks. And she said in her first court appearance that he had tried to sexually assault her and that she had killed him in self-defense. Now, it was definitely overkill. I think she had 6 or 7 shots to him. However, it's not really clear if that's necessarily true, because she later retracted that statement. And part of why that kind of stuck for a bit was Richard Mallory actually had a criminal conviction of rape and assault. So there may have been something to that, but we don't really know, because she again later retracted that when she was looking for the death penalty. Because obviously if she had put in that it was self-defense, they were less likely to execute her. We'll talk about that later. It's utterly fascinating. So she maintains that she killed him in self-defense. Of course, only Aileen and Richard Mallory will ever actually know what went on. We are just left wondering what exactly happened. So she panicked and took his car. She left his body there, and because they had gone to like a wooded area. His body was found like a couple of days later. But she panicked and she took his car and some of his belongings. Now, it was part of this behaviour that would actually ultimately get her caught. I actually also think that this is interesting because she enlisted Tyra's help to get rid of the car. Tyra admits having known that she killed at least one person, so the first person, Richard Mallory, but she said that she thought that it was self-defense as well and that it was a one-off. Interestingly, Tyra never actually got convicted for being like an accessory to murder. The deal that she struck is really, really interesting. So again, we don't know. What was it actually that, you know, she was sexually assaulted, or, you know, was this just a story that she came up with to initially try and get out of being in prison for the rest of her life? Like we honestly, we just don't know. Like, it is just one of those things. I am taking my 237 and I'm going into the shade Bailey, which Elena has informed me is a beautiful blue. So there you go. It better be, or I will revolt. Ooh, you're right. I don't question you. This is brilliant. Yeah. Anyways, so at this point she had killed one person, and which is kind of interesting in the sense that traditionally, obviously, female serial killers, there's not as many of them as there are males, and female serial killers are also more likely to be what is termed as angels of death. So they tend to be weirdly in the caring profession, so nurses, etc., and they may be killing the elderly. Again, I know this is a weird topic, but there you go. This is what you've signed on for. Or they may engage in infanticide, which is where they kill their own kids. Female serial killers, their career tends to be longer than a male serial killer because it's just statistically less likely that a woman will kill. And when they kill, it's more indirect methods like poison, etc., than like hands-on gun, etc. Yeah, that's pretty pigmented. I might put a little bit of the matte on it as well, just to like deepen it a bit or something. I don't know. I don't really know what I'm doing. I thought about it to a certain extent, but nothing beyond kind of like the general colours I wanted to use. I like this though. It is nice. So we know that Tyra definitely had some idea of what was going on. So she then went on to kill there was another person, I can't remember who they were, and again she shot them and she left their naked body in the woods. Now, police were really unsure as to what was going on. The general dynamic is actually that prostitutes are more likely to be victims of murder than be murderers. So this really kind of turned things on its head, so to speak. I need to put more glitter here because it's not quite correct, is it? Whee! Shaky hand. Do your worst, except don't do your worst. Just try to be better. Stay absolutely silent, children. Meh, that'll do. So she went on to kill another person. She left their body. Police were really confused. They didn't know what was going on. She then went on to kill another person. His name was, I believe, Peter Seams. He was 69 and he was a sea merchant. I'm going into the Elf J Kissa Palette again, and I'm going into Confetti, which I actually had to repress because it arrived shattered. But it came from the States. Thank you, Elena. So I'm surprised that more things didn't end up shattered. Like my heart. That was weird. Anyways, this was actually the one that was going to get her. So again, she did. He was a missionary, actually, I believe, and they never found his body, but she had taken his car, and they were able to kind of pin her to it because herself and Tyra were in the car, and they crashed it. They crashed it into a wall, and there were like observers there. They saw them, and they saw them hosing themselves down, trying to get blood off them. Now, they had actually tried to clean the car, which kind of, again, shows foresight, so, and an understanding of what they did was wrong. So, again, in terms of, like, criminal intent, you can't say, like, she didn't know what she was doing was wrong, so, you know, you couldn't ever plead insanity on that particular case. Tyra totally knew what was happening, though. Like, I really don't think that she was as innocent as she claims. But because people had seen them fleeing this car, which was now associated with a missing person, they actually had a description of them. So police had a description of these two women, but again, because they didn't have a body for this one, they couldn't necessarily tie her to the previous murders, which was, you know, frustrating as hell, I would imagine, for them. I'm not getting a huge amount of pigment on this, but sure, look, it is what it is. I want to go into the blue again over here because I don't think it's quite as, like, pow as it could be. But it could be my weird lids just refusing to play ball. Play ball, lids, I tell you, play ball. Yeah, that'll do. I'm going to take this Sigma brush, this little E36, and just swish between the two. So I want to kind of mesh them. Interestingly, even though they tried to clean off that car, behind the headrest, like just under the headrest, there was a bloody handprint. And that's part of how they were able to kind of stick Aileen to that particular crime. In addition to that, she also had taken some of his belongings and pawned them. And part of pawning in America, apparently they take your thumbprint. So even though she was using all of these aliases to sell these particular things, they had her thumbprint. And because she was already in the system from, you know, having gone off and robbed a convenience store in her bikini, they had her on record. I'm just taking more of that, like, purple. I'm trying to smoosh a bit more on. Yes, there's a lot of fallout, but we're not going to worry about that. You know, it's future Teresa's problem. Good luck, future Teresa. I believe in you. I mean, I don't, because you don't have the talent, but it is what it is. I need, like, a floofy brush. Nah, that'll do. This is the Jessup 228 Luxe Crease, and I'm going to go into Confetti and Pretty Girl, which are these two shades here, and just swish them together and put them on the outer corner because screw it, whatever. Life is short, and I'm getting bored of playing with this, like of playing with my eyes. So that was actually part of how they tied her to it. In the end, she actually went on to murder a further 4 people, including a police chief. So, like, her spree was pretty intense. She actually, I mean, this shows you how unwell she was. She was convinced that the police knew that she was doing these crimes and that they just let her do these things because they knew it would be a big story and that they would make millions off it, and that they just let her murder. So the fact that she kind of believed that is a bit telling, really, isn't it? Now, towards the end, Tyra decided to leave her because she could feel, you know, the heat was coming and, you know, things were going to happen. So they had kind of figured out, obviously, that Aileen was their girl. Now, it was very difficult to try and get Aileen because she lived a very vagabond life, I suppose, is the way that we'll say it. That's correct, isn't it? So they had to try and figure out how they were going to essentially arrest her and get her, because, you know, she was frequenting like these, what do you call it, like biker bars, and she could just hop on the back of a motorcycle, never to be seen again. She was used to living off the grid. This is a woman who lived in the woods in Michigan during winter. She was not afraid of living on the road. Like, that was not a thing to her. Right, I'm going to F off for a little bit, put on like mascara, etc. And I'll come back, we'll do the rest of the base because we don't have a huge amount left. The eyes always take me the longest. And then we'll continue to talk about this because, you know, fascinating. The lashes are on! So, you know, and I also put on some primer, and we're now going to try and put on some concealer to cover the horrific spots. And I'm using the NARS concealer. I mean, I've hit such pan on this, and it's filling me with anxiety because now it means I have to go and get another one. Yeah, still have primer on me. Well done. And of course my skin is being, what is the technical term? A twat, I believe is the correct term. Anyways, let's head back into it. So at this point, police officials were trying to figure out how they would apprehend Aileen without potentially ending up in some sort of a gunfight. And they had figured out that she was down at a biker bar called The Last Resort, which, I mean, fitting name. But of course she was in there at like a busy time, and they put some undercover cops in to see, but they couldn't figure out if she had guns, etc. on her. And they didn't obviously want to end up arresting her inside because, you know, what if she had a gun on her, because she killed her victims using a gun, and well, it wouldn't be that hard to find an unregistered gun. Let's be real. Like, you know, it is what it is. Oh, America, you give and you take, you know. Oh God, there's nothing I can really do to cover these spots. Utterly horrific. I hate my skin right now. It's like, hey, you're stressed. Here's something else to stress about. And I'm like, thanks. That's not wildly helpful at all. Thanks. Anyways, let's at least attempt to continue. So they actually had to try, I am looking for stuff, just taking this high beam, or not high beam, what's up? So they had to actually try and like lure her out of The Last Resort because they were afraid that she would just hop on the back of a bike and just be gone, you know, and they'd never see her again. So they had to be really careful about how they were going to go about it. Just have a sponge here and foundations, the True Matte base in F0.5, and oh, definitely towards the end on that. Well done, me. I'm panning, guys, I'm panning. So they managed to apprehend her. Nobody was shot in the crossfire. Now, initially when Aileen was apprehended, she kept fairly quiet and didn't say anything. Now, police were pretty darn certain they had her, but they needed to get a confession, particularly when it came to Peter Seams, because they had never found his body. So they had to try and figure out a way to get her to confess. And they figured out that Tyra, her girlfriend, or ex-girlfriend, I suppose, really at that point, was the way to do this. So they had basically said to Tyra, hey, you know, we know about your involvement in this, but we will let you off. There will be no criminal repercussions if you get her to confess and if you turn on her in court. So Tyra rang Aileen and was like, hey, what's going on? you know, the police are all up at my parents' house and they're saying I'm in trouble and blah, blah, blah. And Aileen was initially suspicious and was like, who's listening to the conversation? And Tyra was like, oh, nobody, like, it's just me, it's just us, like, you know, why are you so paranoid? And she just kept kind of pulling at her emotionally and saying things like, as in Tyra kept doing it and kind of saying like, oh, I don't know what to do and I don't know if I can go on. Bearing in mind that this is a woman who her biological father, her adoptive father, so her like biological grandfather had killed themselves, and she's hearing this person say whatever. Like, I mean, yes, obviously Aileen did all these things, like she did kill these men, like that's not in question. But I do feel she really got like effed over by other people in her life. Like I find it sad. Am I putting on too much concealer? Possibly. Do I know what I'm doing? Definitely not. Definitely not. Try and brighten my under eye. So she was using all of this manipulation, and eventually Aileen was like, oh, you know, don't worry, like tell them you had nothing to do with it, you know, we'll just tell them it was me, and like I'll take the blame, I'll say it was me and that you had nothing to do with it, and you know, don't worry, I'll take care of you, etc. She went back into that sort of role. So Aileen then, of course, gave her confession, said, yeah, I did do these things, but here's the story. Each of these men tried to rape me, and that was why I did this. Now, there's a possibility that the first victim may have done that. Again, we don't know, but it seems kind of unlikely within a 12-month period that she'd have come across that particular thing. I think it was more a case of she had chronic PTSD, and she viewed these men as threats and misinterpreted certain things and saw them as a threat even when they may not have been. That's just my like interpretation of this. I could be completely wrong, you know, just so sue me. So she went into her court appearance saying this, bearing in mind, you know, she had nobody on her side, she was all by herself, you know, she had no family, like, yeah, and she was being villainized, and they had also called her like, was it the damsel in distress killer or something like that, because they maintained that there was no way that Peter Seames, who was a missionary, would have ever used a prostitute, and that he probably just picked her up because she was on the side of the road and that it looked like she was in distress. So that was what like his family kind of went along with. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there. I can't tell you what did or didn't happen. I'm just telling you what it is that I know. Basically, God, that is a stiff brush. Sorry, that was like, it's one from AliExpress, which is, it's not great. Anyways, they were cheap, so it's fine. I am just taking this AliExpress brush, and I don't know what I'm doing. So, you know, you're welcome. I'm going to go into the Profusion and go into this one. Meh, close enough. So she went into her court case, obviously, saying that these men had tried to rape her and that this was all self-defense. And her defense lawyer was like, you should not take the stand because you are super volatile. Like, she clearly had, you know, an emotional regulating disorder, because she would just snap in an instant, and given her background, I don't particularly blame her for that. Pastels are never very pigmented, are they? Look, it is what it is. Thank you, Elena, I do very much appreciate it. And she did actually end up going off in court and ended up saying something along the lines to the jurors of, I hope you all get raped yourself, when they found her guilty. I think they went back and forth on her being guilty and it being self-defense because of the whole Richard Mallory thing. But she did eventually get convicted of 6 counts of murder, but because obviously they didn't have Peter Seames' body, they couldn't, you know, They couldn't do her for murder on that particular one. So there she was, essentially looking towards spending the rest of her life in jail. No possibility of parole. Like that was just going to be her life. God, this is, what am I doing? I don't know. Somebody help. Missa, come over here and help me. I shouldn't be left without adult supervision. I don't know what I'm doing. Why did I do this? Why did I put this under my lash line? I don't know what I'm doing. It seemed like such a good idea at the time. I'm taking the dark blue, by the way, just running it along here, and then I'm going to put the sparkly blue over it, because that's not a bad idea at all. There won't possibly be any fallout. So there she was. She was in prison. She was basically isolated for 23 hours a day. That is not a great life. I think we can all agree. So I'd say she headed into like this massive thing of sheer depression, and she told her defense lawyer, like, hey, we need to stop doing these like acquittals, etc. I'm just going to tell them I'm guilty, and you know, we'll seek the death sentence. Which I think if somebody is actually looking for a death sentence, that should out and out tell you that they probably aren't well. But I would also say that if I was given the option of spending the rest of my life all by myself with nobody to talk to and no opportunity to get away from that, I would probably do something similar. I'd probably ask for something similar. So in that way, I kind of get where she was coming from. Just trying to clean up some of that fallout. You're welcome. You learn so much from me. So, I mean, I think one of the hardest things of like looking at the court case was she defended Tyra to the very end, and she thought that Tyra still like loved her and had feelings towards her. And when you see her expression when she sees Tyra get up on the stand, she's like, oh my God, what is she doing here? And then obviously then Tyra went against her and said all these things about her. You could just, it was like you could see her heart breaking. This is the one person that she had really formed a bond with after her brother Keith, which was a screwed up relationship in and of itself. And she had gone and essentially betrayed her. It's just so sad. Like, I mean, obviously I'm not saying that Aileen wasn't guilty of all the things she did. There's plenty of people who've had the same sort of life and they haven't done what she did, but I think she was dealt a particularly difficult card. And when she had nobody that she could turn to, you know, help her and help take care of her, I just think it's so unbelievably sad, in my opinion. So she was facing all of this time, and in the meantime, this woman called Aileen Wuornos had become essentially obsessed with Aileen and was like, oh, she was it a born again Christian or something like that? She was one of those, like, I don't know, I don't really know much about those particular aspects of the Christian religion. I'm a Catholic. I was brought up Catholic. I say I'm a Catholic just because I never bothered leaving. I never bothered officially being like, I resign, Mr. Pope man. Because you actually have to like officially do something like that. That's how they get you. It's easier to unsubscribe from YouTube than it is to leave the Catholic Church. What the... Yeah. Anyway, that's a completely different tangent. My God, woman, get with it. So Aileen kind of saw obviously the case, and she started to write and communicate with Aileen Wuornos, but Aileen wasn't really allowed to see people unless they were family. And like Aileen ended up being involved very much in the media, and during the court case, etc., Aileen kept saying like, oh, you know, I won't go with anything unless Aileen is okay with it and she'll tell me what to do, etc. So again, this is this poor woman just looking for love and affection and for acceptance to the point that she would take it from a complete stranger. Like, I find it so sad. I genuinely do. Like, I think it's an exceptionally sad story. Just taking a bit of Laura Mercier to try and make it look like I have cheekbones. Let's trick the world, guys. Yeah, cheekbones. Make me look like Johnny Depp. He has amazing cheekbones. Let's be real, people. Let's be real. God, I'm doing well, I think, in terms of putting this all together. Look, if you're not going to compliment me, I will compliment me. I'm like, you're doing really well, Teresa. Well done. Well done. Self-praise is no praise. So her defense lawyer at the time said it was really hard to try and get her to like communicate with them because it made everything 1,000 times slower because she kept kind of being like, hey, you have to put everything through Arlene and I need her to okay it because she's my person now. As is the case with Eileen rather. It was just more people coming into her life and manipulating her and using her for their own gain. Because Aileen, when she was in prison, the only things that she could do to really occupy her time was art. So she would take like blue pens and just do all of these beautiful drawings, and she gave them to Arlene as gifts. But Arlene was looking to open a museum of her stuff and make like a frightening amount of money on that. So, you know, financial gain, etc. I am going to do my brows off camera because it takes me all of like 2 seconds, and yeah, I'm just gonna have a think. And we'll come back in a minute. It just occurred to me that I haven't let you see my eyes. So I'm gonna zoom you in so you can just really appreciate my beauty. So these are the eyes. I mean, I grew them myself. Are they done perfectly? No, but it'll do. It's a Monday. What else am I meant to be doing? So anyways, once Aileen figured out that Arlene had essentially been using her for financial gain, and I personally think a lot of attention because she was going to the media with like everything, I think it kind of broke Eileen's heart all over again. And I think that's what really prompted her to be like, yeah, let's go ahead, let's go for the lethal injection rather than having me sitting here and rotting away for the next couple of years. I could actually kind of see in interviews, because Aileen did do some interviews, I mean, she wasn't wildly coherent, like she was clearly mentally not very well. Like her paranoia was pretty intense. I'm using Kaleidos Diamond Dasher. Thank you, Missa, you absolute sweetheart. And yeah, you could tell she was just like really damned paranoid. Like, it's sad. So eventually, obviously, after exhausting all of that, she managed to have her defense lawyer successfully grant or go through all of the things around getting her to, I mean, what's the technical thing, like of just kind of being like, yes, we're going ahead with your execution. So that went successfully, and the court decided, yeah, we'll execute you. That sounds like a great idea. And you know, she finally had the date then for that all going together. And at this point, she had so few people left in her life. She still had that girl Dawn, who she grew up with in Michigan, who used to actually go and see her kind of frequently. So it was kind of nice that she at least had that much going for her, which I'm sure people will be like, Teresa, why are you feeling sorry for her? She was a murderer. But I'm like, yes, she was also a human being that really clearly did not have the best start in life. I just think it's really bloody sad, you know. You know, obviously she's still responsible for all of her actions, but Dawn went to see her, and on the last day, and she said that it was one of the hardest things that she'd ever done, that just even walking away was really hard, and that she could hear Aileen yelling at her saying, I love you, Dawn, and that she had to, you know, say back, I love you too. And most prisoners, obviously, they get a last meal, you know, when they're being executed. And a lot of them go for like a really big, like, hey, if I'm gonna die, I'm gonna go for like lobster, or I don't know, whatever it is. I'm a vegetarian, so I don't really get these things. I'm just gonna put a little bit of fixing spray on, or setting spray, is that the technical term? And I have an Artittude Cosmetics lipstick in the shade Raspberry Ripple, which Cheryl, naughty woman, sent me. You're beautiful, and I love you very, very much. So I'm going to shut up briefly to put this on. That is a nice red, isn't it? It's very comfortable. I mean, I quite like it. Obviously, I have to still finish off the rest of this story because there is still a tiny bit left. So she'd had her last meal and it was a coffee. That's what she went for her last meal on Earth. She went for a coffee. Like, at least get like a McDonald's or something. I'm just gonna randomly just bronze. So I look a little bit less like Casper. It's funny, whenever I film it, it always makes it look like I'm much paler than I actually am whenever I have this foundation on, but in reality it looks amazing on me. Like, it looks like a perfect shade on me. It's weird. So she then went on, obviously, to be executed. One of only a handful of women, really, to be executed in the United States. It is disproportionately males who are executed, but that's partly because it's disproportionately males who will kill. And I mean, this is part of where I'm like, she was clearly mentally ill, because like the last thing she said, it was the weirdest thing. It was like something along the lines of like, and I'll be back with Jesus on Independence Day. It's something like aliens or something. It was really odd. Like, it didn't make any sense. Like, granted, like, there are some great final lines from like some serial killers, like Albert Fish, etc. But like, this was pretty weird, and I think it shows a big indication of just how unwell she was. And there was a documentary that was done by somebody who was with her in her final days, and like, she was paranoid and just, I mean, it was very clear that she was mentally unwell. And I do think, obviously, like, she should still have taken accountability for the things that she did. I'm a big believer in that. But it was very clear that she had this underlying psychological disorder. She had massive trauma early on. The system had failed her. Her family had failed her. This was kind of what was left to her, and the people that she did care about, they either died or they ended up betraying her. So of course she went, in the end, well, why should I stick around? Like, I find it really sad, you know, like, if I think about it. But yeah, that's her story. That's the whole thing. I'm gonna F off now and gonna take off this sports bra. I know. And I'm gonna do my hair and make myself look like a human, i.e. the way that you saw me in the intro, and we'll just wrap it up because I tried a few new things. Nothing major, but we'll have a little chat about them. Hello friends, I'm back. I didn't even bother brushing my hair. I just was like, let's try and like blow dry that fringe to get it to do a thing. Kind of wouldn't, but like, it is what it is. This is the finished makeup product, and I shall do Vogue. I know. Such style, such panache. Thank you so much to Elena for sending these on. I have it all done up so it says things like, Teresa loves Elena, because I do. I love you so much. Thank you to Missa for giving me the Diamond Dasher, and thank you very, very much to Cheryl for this lipstick, because it is so me. It's part of the Artittude Cosmetics thing, and they had a sale on there recently. I don't know if it's still on, but yeah, there you go. Yeah, I like doing these sort of videos. It does take me a while to get the information on them. So this video was requested by Thea and Rebecca, because they were like, I'd love to see a video on this. And I want to do more of these like requested videos. So if you can drop below a name of a murderer that you would like me to talk about, then I will definitely think about it. It does take me a while to like research these things, and that would be great because that will help me plan out my next makeup and murder video. But that is it. That is the end of the video. Do please like, comment and subscribe. It's helpful for the algorithm. Something about attention, and I don't really have any of that, but you know, whatever. Do please share, because sharing is caring, unless of course it's an STD, in which case, you know, wrap it up, don't be gross. Like, ugh, nobody wants that. But that is it. That is the end of the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.